The peace I once cherished in Hillcrest Gardens turned into a nightmare in a matter of days. Our condominium in Silicon Valley had always been a refuge for people like me, executives seeking tranquility after long hours managing tech companies. Everything changed when Megan Anderson moved into the mansion next door to mine. That March morning, I awoke to the sound of moving trucks. From the window of my office, I watched a red-haired woman coordinating a filming crew in the garden. In just a few minutes, her first words in a live video to millions of followers echoed throughout our valley. Today, I begin my mission to bring awareness to this privileged community. Little did I know that this broadcast would be only the beginning of a series of events that would forever change my life and digital privacy laws. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to gain access to more stories like this. The first few weeks with Megan as a neighbor seemed like just a minor nuisance. She recorded daily videos in her garden, criticizing the unsustainable lifestyle of our community. Her followers began mapping out every move we made, especially during the social events we held. During a dinner I organized for investors, I noticed drones flying over my property. The next day, Megan posted a detailed video about the obscene waste of resources in our community. The video showed aerial footage of our cars, pools, and even the energy consumption of our homes, which she obtained using thermal cameras. David Wilson, our neighbor and surgeon, was the first to face serious problems. Megan discovered that he owned a climate-controlled wine cellar and produced a 30-minute documentary about how the wine consumption of the elites affected global warming. The video went viral and patients started canceling their surgeries. Jessica Parker, CEO of a biotechnology company, also became a target when Megan discovered her private heliport. Within hours, virtual protests flooded Jessica's company's social media, affecting the market value of its shares. I tried to speak with Megan in a friendly manner, inviting her for coffee in my garden. She accepted, but turned our meeting into a live broadcast without my consent. While I tried to establish a constructive dialogue, she manipulated every word I said to make it seem as though I was defending social inequality. At that moment, I realized I was not just dealing with an activist, but with someone determined to destroy our reputation at any cost. Silicon Valley Criminals became a viral series in a matter of days. Megan turned our lives into an unauthorized reality show, exposing every aspect of our routines. She hired private investigators to scour our past and began releasing personal information as she found it. She discovered that David had been divorced 3 times and turned that into a special segment on rich men who cast aside their wives. Jessica's corporate emails were hacked, and confidential conversations about mergers leaked to the public. The shares of her company plummeted 40% in a single day. My professional life started to crumble when Megan discovered that my tech company was developing a facial recognition system. She produced a documentary portraying me as a privacy villain, ironically while invading my own privacy. I lost 3 important government contracts following the negative fallout. Megan's followers began showing up at our workplaces. Some infiltrated our offices as employees just to secretly record our meetings. Others organized protests in front of our companies, scaring away clients and business partners. Our community, once a tranquil refuge, turned into an open-air prison. Cameras were installed on poles near our homes, and drones constantly flew over our properties. Megan created an interactive online map that showed in real time where each resident was, based on data she collected from tracking devices. Sheriff Taylor tried to intervene, but Megan used her influence to start a defamation campaign against him, accusing him of protecting corporate criminals. District Attorney Harrison suggested legal measures, but every attempt to sue was met with even more exposure on social media. Our children began to be harassed at school. Their peers called them mini-criminals, repeating Megan's words. Some parents even forbade their children from approaching our kids, fearing they would be associated with us online. The situation reached a point where we could no longer leave the house without being filmed, photographed, or harassed by Megan's followers. Our lives had transformed into a public spectacle, and every move was analyzed and criticized by millions of people. The lake on my property had always been my private refuge. For years, I had dedicated myself to breeding rare species of fish, a hobby that helped me maintain my sanity after long hours at the office. I was proud of my collection of Japanese koi and tropical fish, all kept in a controlled environment under the supervision of marine life specialists. Megan discovered the lake during one of her drone flights. At first, it was just a few comments in her videos about aristocrats and their aquatic toys. But when she found out that some species in my lake were considered rare, her obsession reached another level. The hashtag #FreeSiliconValleyFish went viral in a matter of hours. Megan produced a 2-hour documentary alleging that I maintained an aquatic concentration camp. She manipulated footage to make it seem as though the fish were in dire conditions, even though I was spending fortunes on water filtration and quality monitoring systems. She began broadcasting live from the edge of my property, narrating each movement of the fish as if they were prisoners. Her followers began creating conspiracy theories about secret experiments that I was supposedly conducting on the lake. Some even suggested that I was developing biological weapons, using the fish as test subjects. Animal rights activist groups began showing up daily at my property's gates. They carried placards with manipulated images of my fish, shouting "murderer" every time I came or went. Megan coordinated these protests from her balcony, streaming everything live and encouraging more people to join the movement. The situation worsened when she gained access to the fish import records. She discovered that some species came from Japan and Indonesia, which led her to create a narrative about international animal trafficking. It didn't matter that all the fish had been legally acquired with the proper documentation. In the internet world, I was already known as an exotic animal trafficker. I tried to explain that the lake was actually a preservation project, that I was working with universities on endangered species breeding programs. But every attempt to clarify was distorted by Megan in her videos. She edited my statements to make it seem as though I was admitting guilt. The stress began to affect my health. I started having difficulty sleeping, worried that activists might invade my property at night and release the fish, which would spell doom for species that needed specific conditions to survive. I hired additional security and installed more cameras around the lake, but that just provided Megan with more ammunition. She started accusing me of creating an animal cruelty fortress and compared the security measures to prisoner camps. The worst part was watching something that always brought me peace being turned into a symbol of oppression and cruelty. The lake, once my sanctuary, became the center of an ideological war I never wanted to fight. Every time I fed the fish, every maintenance of the filtration system, every visit from a specialized veterinarian, everything was broadcast, commented on, and distorted for millions of people who did not know the truth but had already condemned me. Megan's obsession crossed every boundary when she turned my life into a 24-hour reality show. She installed high-definition cameras on her property, all pointed at my house. Her followers could watch every moment of my day from different angles, like cameras in an unauthorized Big Brother. She narrated my routine as if she were a wildlife documentary host. "Watch as the corporate predator leaves his den at 7:15, she would say, as I simply left for work. Every meal I had in my garden, every business call I took by the window, every visit I received, all became content for her channel. Megan created an artificial intelligence system that analyzed my behavior patterns. The program tracked my schedules, identified frequent visitors, and even predicted my routine. Her followers began placing bets on my daily activities, turning my life into a morbid game of entertainment. The drones became more sophisticated. She acquired models with powerful zoom and thermal sensors, allowing her viewers to see through my house's windows. My bedroom, my office, my gym, no space was free from the intrusive eyes of her cameras. Even private conversations were captured by long-range audio equipment. Her YouTube channel even featured a section called Brandon's Hour, where she analyzed my facial expressions, body language, and even my clothing choices. Behavioral experts were invited to offer psychological analyses based on snippets of my routine. Conspiracy theories about my activities multiplied in the comments. The situation reached surreal levels when Megan began coordinating missions with her followers. She instructed them to follow me to various locations, creating a surveillance network that extended far beyond our condominium. I could no longer have dinner at a restaurant or go shopping without being filmed by strangers. The impact on my mental health was devastating. I developed severe anxiety and paranoia. I began obsessively checking for cameras and tracking devices. I installed blackout curtains on every window and rarely went outdoors on my own property. My garden, once my favorite place to relax, became a no-go zone. I tried to sue Megan for invasion of privacy, but she turned every legal action into more content for her followers. My lawyers became characters in her distorted narrative, and every legal document became material for analysis in her live streams. The worst part was the feeling of helplessness. The authorities appeared hesitant to act, fearing the reaction of Megan's massive follower base. Every time the police were called, she streamed live, portraying herself as a victim of persecution by the establishment. My professional life began to crumble. Investors hesitated to meet with me, fearing they would be caught on camera by Megan. Business partners started to distance themselves, worried about the negative association. My company, which I had built for years, was being harmed by relentless surveillance that I couldn't stop. The breaking point came during my daughter Sarah's birthday. We had planned a small celebration in the garden with only close family and a few school friends. Sarah, who was turning 12, was already traumatized by the entire situation, but insisted on having a normal party, just like any other child her age. Megan turned the celebration into a macabre spectacle. She positioned cameras specifically for that occasion and started a special broadcast titled "The Next Generation of the Corrupt Elite." Her followers inundated social media with malicious comments about innocent children. Some even created memes with my daughter's face, comparing her to movie villains. During the party, drones flew so low that their noise frightened the children. The parents of Sarah's friends began calling, worried when they saw their children being broadcast live without permission. One by one, the guests left, leaving my daughter alone with her practically untouched cake. That night, I found Sarah crying in her room, deleting all her social media accounts. Her schoolmates had shared videos of the party, and the comments were too cruel for a preteen to bear. Through her sobs, she asked me why we had to live like this, why we couldn't be a normal family. It was at that moment that something changed inside me. It was no longer just a matter of protecting my privacy or my business. It was about protecting my daughter. I realized that Megan had no moral limits, that to her we were merely characters in her distorted narrative, not human beings with feelings and rights. I began obsessively researching the gaps in digital privacy laws. I discovered that although there were regulations on recording and broadcasting images, they had not kept pace with advances in surveillance technology. Drones, high-powered cameras, facial recognition software, everything operated in a legal gray area. I assembled a group of condominium residents who had also been victims of Megan. Jessica, with her experience in corporate law, began structuring an unprecedented legal action. David offered his network in the medical field to document the psychological impact of digital harassment on our families. I hired a team of digital security experts to document every privacy violation. They developed software that tracked and cataloged each moment Megan invaded our personal space. The final report was frightening. Over 10,000 hours of unauthorized surveillance in just 6 months. But our counterattack needed to be more than legal. It had to be systemic change. I started writing a bill that specifically addressed cyberstalking and unauthorized digital surveillance. The Sarah Law, as I called it in honor of my daughter, proposed clear limits on surveillance technology usage and established severe penalties for violations. The movement started small, with meetings in our community, but soon it gained national proportions. Other digital surveillance victims began sharing their stories. Lawmakers showed interest in the proposal, recognizing that it was time to update our laws for the digital age. As our legal battle gained momentum, Megan intensified her attacks. She turned the Sarah Law into her new target, alleging that it was an attempt to silence whistleblowers and protect the privileges of the elite. Her followers flooded social media with hashtags against the bill, not even understanding its true purpose. But this time, we were prepared. Jessica organized a series of interviews with psychologists and child development experts who explained in detail the devastating impact of cyberbullying and constant surveillance on children and teenagers. David compiled medical studies on the effects of digital harassment on mental health. Sarah, demonstrating a courage that surprised me, decided to record a video telling her story. With a maturity beyond her years, she described what it was like to grow up under constant surveillance, how she had lost friends, and how she could no longer play in her own backyard without fear. Her emotional testimony went viral for reasons different from Megan's broadcasts. This time, people saw the human side of the story. Other teenagers began to speak up. Children of business people, doctors, and teachers shared similar experiences of persecution and online harassment. A support network naturally formed, connecting families facing the same kind of digital terror. Meanwhile, our legal team discovered something intriguing about Megan. Her seemingly moral crusade had a dark financial side. She had monetized every aspect of our exposure, earning millions with advertising, merchandise, and donations from her followers. Her broadcasts were not just activism. They were a highly profitable business based on our degradation. The revelation of this information caused the first cracks in her support base. Followers began to question her motivations, especially when they discovered that she maintained offshore accounts fueled by the money generated from her exposures. The activist who preached against predatory capitalism was, in reality, profiting from the suffering of others. The turning point came when a former employee of Megan leaked emails in which she discussed strategies to maximize engagement by exploiting children. "The younger the victim, the more views we get," one message read. She even planned specific times to record children leaving school, knowing that it would generate more online interaction. Public opinion began to shift. Journalists who once amplified Megan's accusations now investigated her unethical practices. Advertisers started abandoning her channel, worried about being associated with someone who exploited minors for profit. The Sarah Law gained unexpected support from civil rights groups and child protection organizations. The bill was no longer seen merely as a measure to protect the privileged, but as a necessary safeguard for everyone in the digital age. Lawmakers from different political spectrums united around the cause. Amid all this, I noticed a change in our community. The invisible walls Megan had built among neighbors began to tumble down. People who had previously avoided contact for fear of being filmed started meeting up again. Children began to play in the gardens once more. A sense of normalcy, albeit fragile, began to return. The end of Megan's reign of terror did not come with a bang, but with a series of small legal defeats. The first victory was achieved when we secured an injunction prohibiting the use of drones over private properties in the condominium. Next, her long-range cameras were deemed instruments of invasion of privacy, which forced their removal. The Sarah Law was passed in our jurisdiction and began serving as a model for similar legislation in other states. It established heavy fines for unauthorized digital surveillance and created specific protections for minors. Most importantly, it gave victims effective legal tools to combat online harassment. The final blow came when Megan was sued for exploiting minors. The evidence was irrefutable. Emails, text messages, and recordings showed a consistent pattern of predatory behavior directed at children and teenagers. Her assets were frozen, including the offshore accounts where she hid the profits from her investigations. Without access to her surveillance equipment and with advertising revenue plummeting, Megan's digital empire collapsed quickly. Her most fervent followers finally saw the truth behind the facade of a social justice warrior. Many even publicly apologized for having participated in the harassment. Our community then began a slow healing process. Sarah started smiling again more often and made new friends at school. Jessica recovered her professional reputation, and her company started growing once more. David managed to rebuild his personal life away from the invasive spotlight. As for me, I turned my experience into something positive. I began giving lectures on digital privacy and the dangers of cyberstalking. The lake returned to being my refuge, now occasionally shared with groups of students interested in environmental preservation. Eventually, Megan moved away, leaving behind a house full of abandoned surveillance equipment. At Sarah's suggestion, we transformed the property into a community center focused on digital education and cyberbullying prevention. It was our way of ensuring that something good emerged from all that darkness. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to gain access to more stories like this. 5 years have passed since those tumultuous events. The SARA law is now a national benchmark in protection against digital harassment, having been adopted in several states. Its impact exceeded initial expectations, setting legal precedents for cases that previously lingered in legal limbo. Sarah, now 17, has turned her traumatic experience into conscious activism. She created a support group for young victims of cyberbullying and works in partnership with specialized psychologists. Her maturity and resilience surprise me every day. Unlike Megan, she understands that real change demands empathy and respect, not exposure and humiliation. The community center in the old house that once belonged to Megan has become a hub for digital education. We offer workshops on ethical technology use, online privacy, and digital citizenship. It is ironic how a place that once harbored so much negativity now promotes positive connections among people. I have heard that Megan is trying to rebuild her life in another state, far from social media. Some of her closest former followers revealed that she underwent a period of deep reflection about her actions. Although forgiveness is a complex process, I hope she has found a more constructive way to channel her energy. The lake continues to be my sanctuary, but it now carries a different meaning. We regularly welcome visits from schools and universities interested in our rare species preservation program. The same cameras that Megan once used to spy on me now serve scientific studies on fish behavior. Our community emerges stronger from this experience. We learned the importance of protecting not only our physical privacy, but also our digital presence. The walls between houses might remain, but the barriers between people have fallen. Neighbors get to know each other, support one another, and understand that true security comes from unity, not isolation. We realized that technology is not inherently good or bad. It is a tool whose impact depends on how we use it. In our hands, it can build bridges or erect walls, bring people closer or drive them apart, heal or hurt. The choice, as always, is ours.